The morning my life collapse began quietly, so quietly that I would later replay it in my mind again and again, searching for some warning sign I might have missed. Sunlight crept through the thin curtains of my kitchen, settling on the old wooden table where I had eaten breakfast nearly every day for the past 20 years. The house smelled faintly of coffee and toast, familiar and comforting, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. I had no idea that within minutes, that sense of safety would vanish forever. My phone rang while I was standing at the counter, waiting for the kettle to finish boiling. I glanced at the screen and felt an automatic smile form on my face. It was my son. No matter how strained things had become between us in recent years, seeing his name still triggered the same instinctive warmth it always had. He was my only child. The center of my life for decades. I answered without hesitation. "Mom," he said, his voice upbeat and rushed, as if he were already in the middle of something exciting. "I've got news." I leaned against the counter, expecting something impulsive but harmless. He had always been that way, acting first and explaining later. "What is it?" I asked. "I'm getting married tomorrow." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Tomorrow sounded unreal, like a word spoken too fast to make sense. I let out a small laugh. "Tomorrow?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said easily. "Vanessa and I decided there's no reason to wait. Everything's ready." I was still trying to process that when he kept talking, his tone casual, almost distracted, like he was ticking items off a list. "Oh, and just so you know, I transferred all the money from your bank accounts, and I sold your house. I've got to go, the caterers are calling." The line went dead. I stood there frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the empty hum of the disconnected call. The kettle clicked off behind me, but I didn't turn around. My mind replayed his words again and again, desperately searching for a different meaning, a misunderstanding, anything that would make them less impossible. My chest felt tight, like the air had suddenly grown heavier. Then, slowly, a laugh escaped my throat. It wasn't laughter born of humor. It was the sound of shock colliding with clarity. In that moment, something inside me understood that my life had just been split cleanly into before and after, and my son had absolutely no idea what he had just done. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and at 62 years old, I learned that the child you give everything to can still decide you are expendable. I had never lived an extravagant life. Even before everything fell apart, my days were simple and structured around routine. Years earlier, my husband Daniel had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me alone with a 12-year-old boy and a future I had no choice but to face head-on. There was no warning, no goodbye, no chance to prepare. One moment I was a wife planning dinner, the next I was a widow standing in a hospital hallway trying not to collapse while my son cried into my coat. From that day forward, survival became my only focus. I worked 2 jobs when I had to, sometimes 3. I learned to stretch every dollar until it almost broke. Vacations disappeared from my life. New clothes became luxuries I didn't need. I told myself every sacrifice was worth it if it meant my son felt safe, if it meant he never had to carry the same fear that sat in my chest every night when the house went quiet. I believed that love and consistency would be enough. That if I gave him everything I had, he would grow into a man who understood gratitude and restraint. Ryan grew up intelligent, confident, and sharp. He had a way with people, an ability to speak that made others listen. Numbers came easily to him, and so did influence. He studied finance and thrived in environments where control and leverage mattered. I was proud of him, even when his ambition made me uneasy. When he introduced me to Vanessa, I tried not to judge. She was beautiful in a polished, deliberate way, always perfectly dressed, always composed. She spoke carefully, as if every sentence had been rehearsed. When she smiled, her lips curved upward, but her eyes stayed cool and observant. The first time she walked through my home, I noticed how her gaze lingered not on family photos or memories, but on the walls, the floors, the space itself. "This place must be worth a lot now," she said lightly, running her fingers along the edge of the kitchen counter. "It's my home," I replied. Ryan laughed it off too quickly, brushing past the comment, but something settled uneasily in my stomach that day. A few months later, he called me with concern woven carefully into his voice. He said he worried about me managing everything on my own, about online banking, about making mistakes. He offered to help, just a little, he said. Automatic payments. Oversight. Protection. I hesitated. Something in me wanted to say no. But he was my son, and I had trusted him with my heart my entire life. I told myself this was no different. It was. Every Sunday morning, I checked my bank accounts. It was a habit born of necessity, a ritual of reassurance. That Sunday, the numbers didn't make sense. My savings, the money I had built slowly over decades of restraint and discipline, was almost gone. My checking account balance was so low it made my hands shake. At the bank, they showed me the records. Online transfers. Authorized access. Money sent directly to Ryan. I remember sitting at my kitchen table afterward, staring at the wall for hours, unable to cry, unable to think, feeling something inside me crack so quietly it almost went unnoticed. When he called the next morning, excited about the wedding and dismissive about the money, something in me hardened. He laughed when I asked about the accounts. He spoke casually about selling my house, as if it were already a memory. "You'll be fine, Mom," he said. "You've got Social Security." That was the moment I realized he no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an asset that had outlived its usefulness. What he didn't know was that the house he claimed to sell wasn't the one I lived in. Years earlier, on the advice of a colleague from my time working in legal offices, I had quietly placed my primary residence into a trust. The property he sold was a rental, protected by tenants, leases, and laws he had underestimated. He also didn't know that the power of attorney documents he relied on were forged, and badly I didn't confront him. I gathered evidence. Statements, deeds, records. Then I hired a lawyer. "This is criminal," he said calmly after reviewing everything. "Your son could go to prison." I nodded. "Then that's where this goes." I attended the wedding. I smiled for photographs. I watched my son marry a woman who believed she had one. They mistook my silence for weakness. They were wrong. I sat through the ceremony with my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face calm, my expression carefully neutral. No one would have guessed that every word spoken, every smile exchanged, felt distant and unreal to me, as though I were watching a play rather than witnessing my own son's wedding. Ryan looked radiant, confident, certain of his victory. Vanessa stood beside him in white, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. When they said their vows, I listened closely, wondering if either of them truly understood the meaning of the promises they were making, or if those words were just another performance, another transaction dressed up as love. After the reception, they hugged me briefly. Ryan whispered that everything would work out, that I shouldn't worry so much, that he had everything under control now. I nodded and wished them happiness. I meant it in the only way I could at that moment. I wished them the happiness that comes from learning the truth, even if it arrived wrapped in consequences. The following week, my lawyer filed the paperwork. The process moved faster than I expected, perhaps because the evidence was so clear, perhaps because cases like mine were far more common than I had ever realized. Bank fraud, elder abuse, forged documents. Words I never imagined would be attached to my own child now filled official documents with his name printed neatly at the top. When Ryan was first questioned, he laughed. He told investigators there must have been a misunderstanding. He insisted I had given him permission, that everything had been done for my own good. He sounded just as confident as he had on the phone that morning in my kitchen. That confidence evaporated slowly, piece by piece, as facts replaced assumptions and signatures were compared side by side. Vanessa stopped answering my calls almost immediately. Not that I had much to say to her, but the silence was telling. When the subpoenas arrived, she claimed ignorance. She said she trusted Ryan. She said she didn't ask questions. The court listened, but it didn't absolve her. Trust, it turned out, was not a legal defense. Ryan's arrest happened on a gray afternoon. I wasn't there, but I imagined it clearly, the disbelief on his face, the sudden realization that the rules he thought didn't apply to him did, in fact, apply very firmly. When my lawyer called to inform me, I thanked him politely and then sat down on my couch and stared at the wall for a long time. I didn't cry. I felt hollow, like something had finally drained out of me completely. The trial began months later. Walking into that courtroom felt heavier than walking into the hospital the day my husband died. Ryan sat at the defense table, his suit pressed, his hair neatly styled, trying desperately to look like the man he believed himself to be. Every so often, he glanced at me, searching my face for reassurance, for rescue. I kept my eyes forward. The prosecutor laid everything out methodically. The transfers. The forged signatures. The false claims. Each piece of evidence was a brick, and together they formed a wall Ryan could not talk his way through. His lawyer tried to argue intention, misunderstanding, family dynamics. None of it held. When the verdict was read, the room felt impossibly quiet. Guilty. On all counts. Ryan's breath hitched, and for the first time since this ordeal began, he looked small. 7 years in prison. Full restitution. No leniency. As he was led away, he turned and looked at me one last time. His eyes were wet, confused, almost childlike. In that moment, I saw flashes of the boy he had once been, and the grief of that loss hit me harder than anything else. But I did not stand. I did not speak. I stayed seated, still, because this was the boundary I had finally learned to hold. The letters started arriving a few weeks later. At first, they were angry. He accused me of betrayal, of cruelty, of choosing the law over my own son. I read those letters once and placed them in a drawer. I didn't respond. Over time, the tone shifted. The anger softened into confusion, then into something quieter and more fragile. Eventually, the words apology appeared, tentative and unsure, as if he didn't yet know whether he truly meant them. Vanessa filed for divorce before Ryan was transferred to a long-term facility. She claimed she had been misled, that she had trusted him completely. She lost the condo they bought with my money. She lost her savings. Within a year, she disappeared from my life entirely, changing her name and moving away. Control, I learned, does not survive accountability. My own life moved forward slowly. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in small moments. The first night I slept without waking in panic, the first morning I enjoyed my coffee without dread, the first laugh that surprised me because it felt real. I joined a support group for older adults who had experienced financial abuse. Listening to their stories, I realized how close I had come to losing not just my savings, but my independence, my dignity, my sense of self. I began volunteering, speaking to others about protecting themselves, about boundaries, about the dangerous myth that family can never harm you. I told my story calmly, without bitterness, because bitterness only hands power back to the people who took it from you. 2 years into Ryan's sentence, I finally agreed to a phone call. His voice sounded different, stripped of its former confidence. He spoke about time, about regret, about how much silence there was when no one was left to impress. He apologized without excuses. I listened. I told him I hoped he would use the years ahead to understand himself better. I told him I wished him growth. I did not promise forgiveness. Some things cannot be rushed. When the call ended, I felt lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because I had spoken my truth without surrendering myself. Today, my life is quieter than it once was, but it is also stronger. I tend my garden. I travel when I feel like it. I help others navigate the systems that once nearly destroyed me. I no longer confuse love with sacrifice, or loyalty with silence. I did not destroy my son's life. He made his choices, and I made mine. And in choosing myself, I finally learned what real strength looks like. The seasons changed, and with them, my routines. I found solace in small things, the morning light filtering through the curtains, the hum of the city waking outside, the gentle rustle of leaves in my garden. These simple rhythms reminded me that life was ongoing, and though pain could leave scars, it could also foster growth. I became more attuned to details I had once overlooked, the texture of a flower petal, the subtle flavor notes in my coffee, the cadence of laughter from neighbors passing by. Life, I realized, had a rhythm I needed to listen to, one that had nothing to do with betrayal or deceit. I also reconnected with old friends I had distanced myself from, unintentionally or otherwise. Those friendships, once taken for granted, offered grounding. Conversations over tea stretched long into the evenings, meandering across memories, hopes, regrets, and plans. I discovered that people who had weathered life's storms with me could still offer perspective and companionship. Their lives were not free from mistakes, but there was honesty in their struggles, and that honesty was a balm to my own. Ryan's absence created a paradoxical space. His absence was painful because it marked the definitive end of one chapter, yet it was freeing because it allowed me to redefine the boundaries of my life. I no longer measured my worth or peace by his actions. I had learned, through anguish and patience, that forgiveness and accountability are separate. I could acknowledge my own pain without excusing his misdeeds. I could care without being complicit. In those early mornings, alone in my kitchen or sitting in the quiet of my study, I began to journal. Words that had been trapped in my mind, confusion, hurt, frustration, found form on the pages. Writing became a kind of therapy, a way to process the years of betrayal, to articulate the lessons learned and the insights gained. I chronicled my journey not just for myself, but for anyone who might one day face similar circumstances. There was value in bearing witness, in showing that survival is possible even when trust is broken at its deepest levels. I also explored new skills and interests I had deferred for decades. I took up painting, something I had once considered frivolous. Each brushstroke, each attempt to capture light and shadow, became a metaphor for my own life, uneven, imperfect, but capable of beauty. I joined local workshops, connecting with people who had no knowledge of my past, whose encouragement was pure and untarnished. It felt strange at first, to accept kindness without suspicion, but gradually, I learned to let myself receive it. My family, distant though it was, also became a source of cautious support. I had severed ties with Ryan, but I did not sever myself from everyone. My nieces and nephews, young and energetic, reminded me of joy's immediacy. I listened to their dreams with genuine interest, not as a duty but as a privilege. Their innocence and curiosity were healing in ways no legal victory could ever be. Through all of this, I began to understand the deeper layers of love. Love is not blind, it is discerning. Love is not unquestioning, it is wise. Protecting oneself does not negate affection. These truths had been abstract before, they were now lived realities. I no longer confused enabling with care, and I no longer permitted guilt to dictate my boundaries. I occasionally revisited the legal documents, the trial records, and the correspondence from Ryan. These were no longer sources of anger but artifacts of a past that had shaped me. I observed the details with the calmness of an outsider, noting patterns and mistakes, tracing cause and effect. Each detail reinforced the understanding that life's trajectory is often determined by choices, and that those choices are inseparable from responsibility. Time, the great teacher, continued its patient work. The ache in my chest, once so pronounced, had softened to a dull awareness. I remembered the grief, but it no longer consumed me. I remembered betrayal, but it no longer defined me. My life was no longer a ledger of wrongs and losses, it was a canvas, still in progress, rich with possibility. I found myself mentoring others more formally, beyond casual advice. Through community programs and online forums, I shared my story, emphasizing resilience, vigilance, and self-respect. People reached out with their own tales of deception, of family betrayals, of financial and emotional abuse. Listening, advising, encouraging, they became a part of my healing. I realized that transforming personal trauma into guidance for others added purpose to pain. Occasionally, news of Ryan trickled back to me. He had begun educational programs in prison, working on rehabilitation and introspection. I felt a complex blend of emotions, relief, hope, lingering sorrow. He was still accountable for his actions, but there was a possibility that he might emerge from this experience differently, perhaps wiser. I did not wait for him to change to reclaim my life. I had already begun that process. Relationships outside the family took on new significance. Friendships deepened. I met new people through shared activities, volunteer work, and social events. Trust became a currency I spent judiciously, but the returns were authentic. I realized that while family bonds can fracture, chosen bonds can flourish with mutual respect and understanding. I invested in these connections, not as a hedge against loneliness, but as a conscious celebration of shared humanity. The physical world, too, became a canvas for my renewal. I renovated my home, not extravagantly, but thoughtfully, creating spaces that nurtured reflection and creativity. A small reading nook by the window, a modest studio for painting, a quiet garden corner, all became extensions of my inner state. Each change was deliberate, a statement that life, even after betrayal, could be curated to foster peace and growth. I reflected often on the lessons embedded in this painful journey. Control, I learned, is largely an illusion. People act according to their own desires, and sometimes those desires clash violently with our own expectations. Happiness, resilience, and security are built not by attempting to dominate others, but by cultivating self-sufficiency, awareness, and boundaries. Forgiveness is optional, accountability is essential. I began to document these reflections, expanding the journal into a manuscript. The act of writing became an exploration of human psychology, of the intersections between familial loyalty, morality, and personal responsibility. I traced patterns in my own life and in those of others I had encountered. This work, I realized, could serve not only as catharsis but as a guide, a manual for navigating complex emotional and ethical landscapes. Even as I filled pages with insights, the past did not haunt me as it once had. Memories arose unbidden, yes, but they were accompanied by understanding rather than resentment. I could recall Ryan's betrayals without visceral pain, Vanessa's departure without bitterness, and the courtroom proceedings without reliving humiliation. These recollections became data points in a larger map of personal growth. Through my outreach, I discovered stories that mirrored my own, though each was unique in detail. I realized that financial and emotional manipulation within families is more common than society admits. Many suffered in silence, believing that confrontation would be interpreted as disloyalty. By sharing my narrative, I illuminated a path towards self-preservation without moral compromise, demonstrating that one could love while remaining vigilant. In quiet moments, I allowed myself reflection on what I had lost. Not possessions, or savings, or even the ease of family life, those were recoverable or replaceable. What I mourned was the illusion of certainty, the belief that blood ties alone could ensure loyalty, honesty, and care. Accepting this truth was bitter, but it opened the door to genuine freedom. The garden outside my home became a metaphorical classroom. Seasons passed, plants flourished and withered, each cycle teaching patience, humility, and the necessity of nurturing. I tended roses and herbs, flowers that required attention yet yielded subtle rewards. Watching life unfold in miniature taught me that recovery and growth are incremental, that beauty can emerge even from soil once thought barren. I traveled occasionally, seeking landscapes untouched by the echoes of my domestic life. Mountains, rivers, historic towns, all offered perspective. In unfamiliar surroundings, I confronted my vulnerabilities and limits, realizing that adaptability was not just a skill but a mindset. Experiencing life outside my prior orbit reminded me that resilience is as much about openness as it is about caution. Eventually, I began hosting small gatherings at my home. These were not grand parties but intentional meetings with people who valued depth over pretense. Conversations ranged from literature to ethics, from personal stories to philosophical debates. I noticed that I listened differently now, not with judgment, but with empathy grounded in discernment. The act of listening became restorative, a bridge between past wounds and present understanding. Time, I understood, is neither linear nor forgiving, but it is instructive. Every year reinforced the notion that personal strength is constructed through choices, awareness, and the willingness to confront pain rather than suppress it. I measured progress not in the absence of hurt, but in the capacity to navigate hurt without being defined by it. I also dedicated time to learning new disciplines, from digital literacy to mindfulness practices. Technology, once intimidating, became a tool for connection and empowerment. Meditation and breathing exercises became daily rituals, offering grounding in moments of emotional turbulence. Each skill acquired was a brick in the foundation of renewed independence. My narrative, once consumed by betrayal and loss, gradually expanded to include hope, growth, and deliberate joy. I began to see life as a series of choices, each carrying consequences that are neither inherently good nor bad but instructive. This reframing allowed me to approach relationships, career, and personal development with clarity and intention. Even correspondence from Ryan, sparse as it became, shifted my perception. I did not seek reconciliation, yet I observed his words analytically, noting change in tone, self-awareness, and acknowledgement of consequences. The dynamic between us, once toxic and imbalanced, became a study in accountability and the limits of influence. I could acknowledge his growth without compromising my own boundaries. As the years passed, I wrote, spoke, painted, mentored, and traveled. My life's fabric, once frayed by deception, became woven with purpose, resilience, and intentionality. I no longer defined myself by the actions of those who had wronged me. I defined myself by how I responded, by the life I chose to cultivate in spite of past betrayals. I realized that peace is not a state to be attained externally, it is a discipline, a practice, a daily choice. Boundaries, self-respect, and deliberate engagement with the world are the tools of this peace. With each passing day, I refine my understanding of what it means to live fully, to act wisely, and to nurture both self and community without falling prey to manipulation or misplaced loyalty. I continued to wake each morning with a sense of purpose that had previously eluded me. There was no grand epiphany, no sudden moment of triumph, only the accumulation of small, deliberate actions that compounded over time. Breakfast became a ritual of mindfulness, the sound of water boiling, the aroma of brewed coffee, the texture of toast under my fingers. These small attentions to life reminded me that existence itself is worth appreciating, independent of anyone else's actions. The afternoons were reserved for study and reflection. I immersed myself in literature, history, and philosophy, seeking perspectives that challenged my assumptions and broadened my understanding of human behavior. Each book was a mirror, revealing aspects of myself I had neglected, as well as a lens, providing insights into the motivations of others. Through these readings, I discovered a renewed curiosity, a hunger for understanding that replaced the emptiness once left by betrayal. Evenings were often spent outdoors. I walked through nearby parks, observing the rhythms of nature, birds settling for the night, leaves trembling in the wind, children chasing after fleeting shadows. These moments of quiet observation became meditative. I began journaling about them, noting not just the events themselves, but the feelings they evoked, the calm, the wonder, the recognition that life moves in cycles, indifferent to human dramas, yet offering infinite lessons for those willing to observe. Through journaling, I noticed patterns emerging. Repetition, patience, and attention were not just principles in nature, they were principles in human life as well. Healing required patience. Trust required repetition, both in self-affirmation and in interactions with others. Insight required attention, to notice subtle signs in behavior and emotion that previously went unrecognized. Each entry became a roadmap of self-discovery, an evolving record of a life in recovery. I became more intentional in my relationships. I no longer sought approval or validation from people who had caused me harm. Instead, I invested in connections where mutual respect, honesty, and care were evident. These relationships were not perfect, they never are, but they were functional, nurturing, and reciprocal. I realized that the quality of my relationships directly influenced my peace of mind, and I became vigilant in protecting both. Professional life, too, evolved. I approached work with renewed focus and diligence, not as an escape, but as an extension of the discipline I was cultivating in my personal life. Challenges that once felt overwhelming were now opportunities for problem-solving and growth. I discovered that competence, integrity, and persistence could create respect and influence without manipulation or deceit. This realization further strengthened my confidence and sense of agency. Travel became more than leisure, it became a method of education and reflection. I explored both distant cities and nearby towns, taking note of cultural differences, social structures, and individual behaviors. In these experiences, I observed resilience and ingenuity in others, learning indirectly from their triumphs and failures. Traveling alone or with trusted companions reminded me that self-reliance does not equate to isolation, it is simply a balance between independence and connection. I also dedicated time to volunteer work, seeking to contribute to the community without expectation of reward. I found that service, especially when performed without recognition, created a sense of fulfillment deeper than any material acquisition. I engaged with local initiatives, mentored young people, and participated in efforts that addressed social inequities. Through service, I connected with a sense of purpose that transcended personal grief, anchoring my life in collective well-being. Creativity, long dormant, resurfaced fully. Painting became a daily practice, and over time, my work developed its own voice. Each canvas was a reflection of my inner state, evolving from the chaos of past experiences to the calm clarity of renewed self-awareness. Art became both expression and meditation, a bridge between memory and imagination, loss and hope. I began sharing my work in local exhibitions, receiving feedback not just on technique but on the emotions evoked. These interactions reinforced the universality of struggle and the shared capacity for healing. Through all of this, I maintained careful reflection on the past, not as a means of reliving pain, but as a guide for navigating the present. I studied psychological patterns, both in myself and in others, understanding that human behavior is often predictable, if one pays attention. This knowledge empowered me to set boundaries confidently and to discern intentions without cynicism. I became skilled at observing actions rather than relying on promises, and this vigilance became a protective layer that enhanced my emotional stability. Relationships outside my immediate circle deepened in authenticity. I encountered people with their own histories of betrayal, loss, and recovery, and shared with them lessons I had learned. Conversation became a vehicle for empathy and understanding. Through dialogue, I realized that most people are grappling with invisible burdens, and that patience, listening, and genuine concern can create connections that are rare and enduring. In the quieter moments, I reflected on the nature of forgiveness. Forgiveness is often misinterpreted as condoning wrongdoing, but I understood it as a conscious release of attachment to resentment. I could forgive without forgetting, without reconciliation, without diminishing the seriousness of the betrayal. Forgiveness became a tool for personal freedom, a way to reclaim energy previously consumed by anger and grief. The legal aftermath, once a source of anxiety, became more a matter of record than of concern. I reviewed correspondence, contracts, and agreements with detachment, noting not just errors, but lessons. Each legal document became an example of the practical necessity for vigilance, awareness, and preparedness in every aspect of life. I began teaching these principles informally to friends and acquaintances, helping them avoid pitfalls I had encountered firsthand. Over time, my home transformed into a sanctuary. Books lined the shelves, art adorned the walls, and plants flourished on windowsills. Every object, every arrangement was intentional, a reflection of values and priorities. Visitors often remarked on the calmness of the space, and I realized that physical environments influence emotional states profoundly. Creating a home that nurtures reflection, creativity, and peace was a form of self-care as deliberate as meditation or exercise. I continued to explore the world, both externally and internally. Hiking trails, riverbanks, urban streets, each offered insights into endurance, adaptation, and the beauty of impermanence. Alone or in the company of trusted friends, I observed life unfolding without the distortions of expectation or control. Nature became both metaphor and teacher, demonstrating the cycles of growth, decay, and renewal that mirrored my own journey. My journal expanded into a more structured manuscript, an integration of narrative, reflection, and practical guidance. I aim not just to recount experiences, but to distill lessons applicable to others navigating betrayal, loss, and self-reclamation. Topics ranged from emotional resilience to ethical discernment, from practical vigilance in personal affairs to philosophical reflections on human behavior. The writing process became iterative, each draft refining both content and understanding. Art and literature became intertwined with teaching. I led workshops that combined creative expression with reflective exercises, guiding participants to explore personal challenges while developing tangible skills. Observing others navigate their own obstacles reinforced my understanding that recovery is deeply individual, yet guided by universal principles of awareness, patience, and intentional action. Through mentorship, volunteering, and creative endeavors, I cultivated a sense of legacy. My life, once overshadowed by betrayal, now carried impact beyond immediate circles. I observed the ripples of guidance, encouragement, and shared knowledge affecting individuals, families, and communities. Purpose, I realized, amplifies personal resilience, transforming past suffering into constructive action. Even in moments of solitude, I found contentment. I no longer measured my days by external validation, nor did I allow past trauma to dictate my emotional state. I approached each moment with curiosity, attentiveness, and gratitude. Solitude became a canvas for introspection, reflection, and planning, rather than a space for rumination or regret. I embraced technology as a tool for connection and growth. Online courses, virtual communities, and digital resources expanded my reach and understanding. Through these platforms, I discovered perspectives, skills, and philosophies that further enriched my worldview. I balanced online engagement with real-world presence, ensuring that technology served purpose rather than distraction. Financial responsibility became a deliberate practice. I developed budgets, tracked expenses, and planned investments. Money, once a source of anxiety or distraction, became a tool for independence, security, and opportunity. By aligning financial decisions with long-term goals, I cultivated a sense of control and foresight. I also sought opportunities to teach others practical financial literacy, reinforcing my own understanding while contributing to community empowerment. Throughout this period, I maintained a rigorous journaling practice. My entries evolved from reactive reflections to structured analysis, documenting patterns in thought, behavior, and emotion. I examined responses to challenges, assessed the outcomes of decisions, and hypothesized alternative strategies. Journaling became both a mirror and a laboratory, reflecting the present state of mind while enabling experimentation with new approaches to life, relationships, and work. Spiritual and philosophical reflection became a significant dimension of my journey. I explored the writings of thinkers from diverse traditions, seeking understanding of concepts like suffering, impermanence, ethical responsibility, and human potential. These studies reinforce the interconnectedness of personal growth, social engagement, and moral reflection. I realized that while circumstances influence outcomes, personal choices shape character, and cultivating virtues such as patience, empathy, and integrity is essential for meaningful life. Professional pursuits deepened in sophistication and intentionality. I approached projects with foresight, attention to detail, and ethical awareness. Colleagues noted the shift in demeanor and methodology, less reactive, more strategic, more collaborative. I developed skills in leadership, communication, and problem-solving that extended beyond technical expertise, enabling me to contribute meaningfully to organizational objectives while preserving personal values. Evenings often included reflection, creativity, and social engagement. I alternated between solitary practices, such as writing and painting, and interactive experiences, such as discussions, collaborative projects, or volunteer work. Each activity served a purpose. Creativity fostered expression, reflection reinforced awareness, and engagement strengthened community connection. Life became a series of intentional acts, each contributing to growth, stability, and fulfillment. Through repeated practice and reflection, I became attuned to subtleties in human behavior and social dynamics. I learned to recognize intentions, patterns of communication, and underlying motivations. This awareness enabled both empathy and discernment. I could offer support without overextending myself, maintain relationships without losing boundaries, and navigate social complexities without succumbing to manipulation or undue influence. Nature continued to be both teacher and sanctuary. Hiking, camping, and observing ecosystems provided lessons in adaptation, resilience, and interdependence. I noted the cyclical patterns of growth and decay, the subtle balance between forces, and the capacity for regeneration even after disturbance. These observations were not merely metaphorical, they informed approaches to personal, professional, and social challenges, highlighting the importance of patience, observation, and responsive action. Health and wellness became integrated into every dimension of life. Nutrition, exercise, mental health, and rest were prioritized not as obligations, but as foundations for sustained engagement with the world. I experimented with various practices, tracking outcomes and refining routines to optimize energy, focus, and emotional stability. This approach demonstrated that consistent, mindful care of the body and mind creates a platform for achieving both immediate and long-term goals. I also embraced mentorship, both giving and receiving guidance. Learning from those with more experience provided insight, while teaching others reinforced understanding and fostered leadership skills. Mentorship became a two-way process, enriching both parties and expanding the network of shared knowledge and mutual support. This dynamic strengthened my sense of purpose and connection within a broader community of growth-oriented individuals. Over time, I developed a philosophy that combined practicality with reflection. Life, I realized, is not about perfection or avoidance of hardship, it is about responsiveness, intentionality, and learning. Mistakes, setbacks, and betrayals are inevitable, but they can be transformed into opportunities for growth, clarity, and empowerment. By integrating reflection, action, and creativity, one can navigate life with resilience, insight, and fulfillment. The realization of resilience became a cornerstone of my existence. I understood that life's trials, both subtle and profound, were not merely obstacles, but catalysts for transformation. Early on, moments of failure had felt like insurmountable walls, but over time I learned to treat them as mirrors, reflecting the areas requiring attention, patience, and strategy. Each setback, whether professional disappointment or personal conflict, became an invitation to observe my responses, identify patterns, and cultivate adaptive strategies. In doing so, I not only navigated challenges more effectively but also strengthened a sense of internal stability that no external circumstance could easily shake. I found that journaling, combined with structured reflection, amplified these insights. Instead of simply recounting daily events, I began to categorize experiences, noting emotional triggers, behavioral tendencies, and outcomes. This system enabled me to detect subtle biases, recurring thought patterns, and emotional blind spots. Through careful documentation, I could trace progress across months and years, observing incremental growth that might have otherwise been invisible. Reflection, therefore, evolved into a disciplined practice of self-assessment, goal-setting, and long-term planning. Each entry was not only a record but a dialogue with myself, a continuous negotiation between who I had been, who I was, and who I aimed to become. Creativity, once a sporadic outlet, became a daily companion. Writing, painting, and music allowed me to express emotions that words alone could not contain. Through these mediums, I explored themes of identity, loss, aspiration, and connection, often discovering that the act of creation clarified internal states more than analytical reasoning could. Furthermore, by sharing these works with trusted peers or mentors, I encountered feedback that offered alternative perspectives, reinforcing the idea that expression and reflection are most powerful when coupled with dialogue. Over time, creativity became not just personal therapy but a bridge to understanding and connecting with others on a deeper level. Professional life also transformed under this new paradigm. Tasks that once seemed routine or burdensome were reframed as opportunities for mastery and ethical contribution. I approached projects methodically, integrating research, critical analysis, and collaborative input. Colleagues began to notice the shift, not merely in outcomes, but in demeanor. I was calmer, more intentional, and more effective at balancing multiple priorities. I realized that professionalism is not simply about output, but about integrating skill, character, and strategic foresight. This approach not only enhanced performance but also fostered credibility and respect, demonstrating that growth in personal and interpersonal capacities directly reinforces professional effectiveness. Health and wellness remained an integral focus. Early missteps with diet and exercise taught me the consequences of neglect, while disciplined routines revealed the profound connection between physical well-being and mental clarity. I adopted practices that balanced strength, endurance, and flexibility, integrating mindfulness techniques into physical activity to enhance presence and reduce stress. Sleep, nutrition, and hydration were treated not as peripheral concerns, but as foundational pillars, each essential for sustaining energy, creativity, and emotional equilibrium. Observing these principles in practice reinforced the broader truth: consistent care of the body and mind creates the conditions for sustained engagement with life's complexities. Community involvement emerged as another essential layer. Volunteering, mentoring, and leading initiatives within educational and social programs allowed me to apply personal growth toward tangible impact. Teaching, in particular, reinforced the principle that learning is reciprocal. Guiding others through challenges often clarified my own understanding. This synergy, where personal development and communal contribution reinforce one another, became a guiding principle. By investing in others, I not only enriched their lives but deepened my own sense of purpose, cultivating a virtuous cycle of growth, empathy, and action. The integration of technology also became a significant factor in personal and professional advancement. Rather than allowing digital tools to fragment attention or create distraction, I curated their use for research, communication, and creative expression. Tools for project management, collaborative writing, and data analysis streamlined complex tasks, freeing mental capacity for critical thinking and innovation. Social media was approached with intentionality, balancing connection with boundaries to prevent overexposure to stress or comparison. This deliberate engagement underscored a broader principle: technology is neutral, and its value is determined by conscious and disciplined application. Relationships continued to evolve along these lines of intentionality. I prioritized interactions that were reciprocal, supportive, and aligned with long-term growth. Conflict, once a source of anxiety, became an arena for skillful negotiation, empathy, and perspective-taking. I learned to articulate boundaries clearly while remaining open to feedback, understanding that respect, both for oneself and for others, is foundational to sustainable connection. Romantic, familial, and professional relationships all benefited from this approach, with trust and mutual understanding replacing assumption and reactive behavior. Philosophical exploration deepened in parallel. I immersed myself in texts from diverse traditions, exploring ethical frameworks, existential questions, and theories of consciousness. Meditation on these ideas clarified personal values and informed decision-making, providing a compass for navigating uncertainty. I realized that intellectual engagement is not merely academic; it provides tools for constructing meaning, evaluating choices, and understanding the broader context of human experience. The intersection of philosophy, reflection, and action created a life that was both deliberate and adaptive, capable of responding thoughtfully to both opportunity and adversity. Financial literacy and responsibility became intertwined with these broader lessons. By approaching finances with strategy and mindfulness, I cultivated independence, resilience, and the capacity to invest in meaningful opportunities. Budgeting, saving, and exploring ethical investments were not merely exercises in prudence but extensions of personal agency. Money, once a source of stress, became a tool for realizing goals, fostering autonomy, and supporting community initiatives. Teaching financial literacy to others further reinforced these principles, creating an ecosystem of knowledge, practice, and empowerment. Nature continued to serve as a persistent guide and refuge. Time spent hiking, camping, or observing ecosystems highlighted principles of resilience, interdependence, and cyclical growth. Witnessing regeneration after disturbance, the intricate balance of species, and the quiet persistence of life informed my approach to challenges. Nature demonstrated that patience, observation, and responsiveness yield more enduring results than reactionary impulses. The lessons drawn from natural systems were integrated into problem-solving, leadership, and personal growth, underscoring the universality of certain principles across contexts. Spiritual reflection, while distinct from organized religion, provided another dimension of grounding. Practices such as meditation, contemplation, and mindful engagement with ethical principles cultivated presence, empathy, and perspective. They offered a framework for reconciling inner conflict, managing stress, and aligning actions with long-term values. Spiritual exploration emphasized that fulfillment emerges not from external accumulation but from coherence between thought, emotion, and action, creating an internal compass resilient to life's inevitable vicissitudes. Time management, often underestimated in early experiences, became a deliberate practice. By analyzing patterns of attention, energy, and priority, I structured days to maximize productivity while preserving flexibility. Strategic allocation of time for work, reflection, creativity, social connection, and rest created a rhythm that balanced efficiency with adaptability. Over time, this structure not only improved outcomes but reduced stress, fostering a sense of flow where daily activities aligned seamlessly with long-term objectives. Over the years, the accumulation of these practices, reflection, creativity, wellness, professional discipline, community engagement, philosophical inquiry, financial literacy, technological intentionality, and time management, formed a comprehensive framework for living intentionally. Each aspect reinforced the others, creating a dynamic system where growth in one area amplified progress in another. Life became less reactive and more architected, guided by principles that were tested through experience, reflection, and adaptation. I began documenting the broader narrative of this transformation, not merely as a personal record but as a guide for others navigating similar journeys. I wove together lessons learned, strategies developed, and insights observed into a continuous narrative, emphasizing practical application alongside philosophical reflection. This narrative approach demonstrated that growth is iterative, non-linear, and deeply interconnected with both internal discipline and external engagement. Each chapter of life became a case study in resilience, adaptability, and intentionality, illustrating the nuanced interplay between circumstance and choice. As the years unfolded, I came to appreciate that the journey itself, the constant interplay of challenge, reflection, growth, and connection, was the true measure of a life well lived. Achievement, while gratifying, was secondary to the cultivation of resilience, clarity, and empathy. I recognized that every setback carried the seeds of insight, every relationship offered lessons in patience and understanding, and every endeavor, whether professional or personal, provided an opportunity to practice intentionality. Life, I realized, was not about reaching a final destination but about navigating the continuum of experience with awareness, integrity, and purpose. The synthesis of these lessons created a life characterized by balance and adaptability. Creativity, reflection, wellness, professional discipline, and community engagement were not isolated pursuits but integrated dimensions of a coherent whole. Each informed the others. Meditation enhanced professional focus, physical discipline strengthened emotional resilience, philosophical inquiry refined decision-making, and social contribution enriched personal fulfillment. In embracing this holistic approach, I discovered that the boundaries between personal growth and external impact blurred. Nurturing oneself inevitably nurtured others, and contributing to the world reinforced inner strength. Ultimately, I understood that life's meaning is constructed through conscious engagement with both the internal and external worlds. It is shaped by the choices we make, the principles we uphold, and the connections we cultivate. By aligning actions with values, fostering understanding across difference, and embracing the iterative process of learning, I achieved a sense of coherence and satisfaction that transcended transient achievements or material gain. The journey, with all its complexity, became a testament to the power of intentional living. Looking back, I saw a narrative not defined by linear success but by depth, insight, and integration. Every chapter, from early missteps and moments of doubt to periods of intense learning and reflection, wove together into a tapestry of growth. There was a profound beauty in the interdependence of experiences, the ebb and flow of challenges and triumphs, and the ongoing negotiation between aspiration and acceptance. Life, in its fullness, became both a mirror and a canvas, reflecting my evolving self while providing endless opportunities to create, connect, and contribute. In the final reckoning, I realized that the essence of this journey was not about reaching perfection but about embracing the process, observing carefully, acting deliberately, reflecting consistently, and engaging meaningfully with the world. The culmination of years of introspection, effort, and dialogue was a life that, while imperfect, was intentional, resilient, and deeply connected to self, to others, and to the wider world. And in that understanding, I found not an endpoint but a continuing path, one defined by presence, purpose, and the ongoing pursuit of growth. This narrative, spanning countless experiences, lessons, and reflections, represents not merely a personal account but a framework for living, a continuous reminder that life's richness is measured not by the finality of accomplishment but by the depth, intentionality, and integrity with which it is lived. I share this not for sympathy, but for solidarity. If my story has resonated with you, if you've ever felt the ground give way beneath you, know that you are not alone. Strength is not something we are born with, it is something we build, one difficult choice at a time. I'll be sharing more stories like this on my channel, stories of resilience, healing, and the quiet power of choosing yourself. If you'd like to join me on this journey, please consider subscribing. A simple click means the world to me, and it helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Thank you for listening. Truly. If you want to hear more stories like this, I would be so honored to have you subscribe. Hit that button below. It lets me know you're here, and it helps this community grow. Together, we can remind each other that no matter what we face, our stories aren't over until we say they are. If this story has made you think, or feel, or remember your own battles, then sharing it has meaning. My channel is a space for real conversations about family, boundaries, and finding your power later in life.